I'm so thrilled to be welcoming everyone to another installment of Aiming High. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Megan Bernstein, the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement here at Marlborough, and I'm so happy to be here virtually with all of you. So let's just get right into it. We have the great good fortune of hearing from three classmates and friends from the class of 1995. I think they have many classmates and friends joining them, I can see in the chat. And moderating this discussion will be Marlborough's own Director of Equity and Inclusion, Dr. Jenn Wells. It's my honor to be introducing Dr. Wells. She's Marlborough's inaugural Director of Equity and Inclusion. This is her second school year here at Marlborough, but first school year in person. So we're very happy to finally be able to welcome her to campus. Her impact and presence has already absolutely been felt amongst the community, and we are so lucky to have her. Prior to coming to Marlborough, Dr. Wells had a 12-year career in higher education doing social justice and multicultural affairs, with most of her experience actually being in women's colleges, such as Barnard and Scripps College. She recently became Dr. Wells when she received her doctorate in organizational change and leadership from USC, and her dissertation was on organizational resistance towards chief diversity officers in small liberal arts colleges. Very light topic for a dissertation. Dr. Wells, it's my pleasure to turn things over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Megan. It is my pleasure to be able to host this amazing panel that we have here for you. It sounds like many of you might have a personal connection to our wonderful alums and panelists today, but being able to hear from them about their experiences, not only as Marlborough students, but now where they're doing very important work in the realm of social justice and equity. And so we'll go ahead and kick it off immediately and lead into the questions where they can introduce themselves. So I'm wondering, Connie, do you want to start us off by just introducing yourself and the work that you do currently, and any other information you want to share with the group?
Sure. Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with Nia and Celia today. I am currently the CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles. We are the largest civil rights and legal service organization in the country, serving the Asian Pacific Islander community. Prior to joining Advancing Justice LA in August of 2020, I spent 11 years as the executive director of another culturally specific nonprofit called Korean American Family Services, or KFAM. But I had started my career as a civil rights attorney, practicing for 7 years at the ACLU in Chicago and the Housing Rights Center in Los Angeles, doing immigrant rights, reproductive rights, First Amendment, police accountability, and religious and racial profiling.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Connie. Why don't we move then to Celia?
Yes, hello everyone. And I just have to shout out folks and who are here with us. It makes my heart so happy, and so many amazing memories that are just flooding me right now. So sending everyone a virtual hug for sure. Yes, as you shared, my name is Celia. I am currently the Executive Vice President of Education for the Cesar Chavez Foundation. And in my current role, I lead all of the education efforts for the work that we do. Currently, I am charged with the space of innovating, developing and growing products and also services that are culturally responsive for kids growing up in working communities. And my work really is across the Southwest. Prior to that, I've been in education my whole career, so 22 plus years now. Started as an educator for LA Unified, started in elementary, taught there for 7 years. And then after that, moved on to just doing work in two different nonprofits. The first one being Teach for America, where I was really charged with leading the team that was coaching and developing first and second year teachers across all of LA County, and including managing the alumni network. And then after that, went over to Education Pioneers as an executive director there, where I was tasked with thinking about how do we bring in folks with non-instructional expertise, right, into the education sector, just given all of the needs that we were seeing. So, for example, folks who have expertise in data analytics, finance, legal, all of that good stuff that we were charged with bringing in. And I spent a little bit of time scaling that work and starting a new site over in Colorado as well. So yeah, really, really happy to be here.
So thank you. And then Nia, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
I guess. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you again. It is Nia Dawson here living in Estes Park, Colorado, literally on top of a mountain. The Student Services Program Manager for Eagle Rock School and Professional Development Center. And I've been here almost 4 years now. Pretty much, I do all of the programming and coordinate all activities, classes, everything that is outside of the academic class time for students, as well as the community. And prior to moving to the top of this mountain, I was working in Harlem at the Harlem Children's Zone for about 6 years in their QA department, as well as a director for one of their high school after-school programs. So I stayed with the high school population, and now I'm at an alternative high school that is a boarding school here in Colorado.
Awesome. It's so amazing hearing about all the work that you all are doing and the populations you're working with. I do want to start, however, maybe with thinking about where you came from, right? We all know that you all are Marlborough alums. And so I'm wondering if you might first start with sharing a little bit about your Marlborough experience. What were some of the things you were involved in? And if you think back to maybe your time when you were at Marlborough, did you see yourself maybe doing some of the work that you see that you're doing now? And maybe we'll go ahead and start with Nia.
Yeah. I'm originally from LA and like from mid-city. So Marlborough wasn't that far away from me, though based on my neighborhood, could seem like it was a totally different world. I was a student at St. James Elementary. So Marlborough was kind of like a feeder for it. So I actually got to stay at Marlborough with students I had been in class with from kindergarten. So students who are on folks who are on right now, like Amanda Wells, been in school together since kindergarten all the way through high school. So that was pretty awesome. I don't even know where to start with that one. Throw it to me one more time, Jen.
Basically, what was your Marlborough experience like, and how does it relate to maybe where you see yourself right now, whether it influenced you and set you on your path, or maybe did you see some things at Marlborough where you're like, I want to impact institutions differently?
Yeah, I think at Marlborough, I didn't necessarily see myself. I didn't look around and see myself on the walls. I didn't see myself in the faculty. I didn't really see myself. And I think what that led me to do was make sure that I helped other students to see themselves in all and every space that they possibly could. Because without seeing someone like you in that space, it's hard to imagine that you could get to that space. So for me, it was the lack or the non opportunity to be able to either fully express, fully see, fully imagine myself, and wanting to make sure I created that opportunity for other students who might be in my similar position. I don't know that I considered myself an other, but I think I was othered and part of the other crowd as I was there with Connie and Celia in this other space there. And I don't know that I always had the adult that I needed to help me and give me the support that I needed. So I think in terms of my career path, it was like making sure that I could be the adult that other students like me needed in their lives at this really critical time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. How about you, Celia?
Yeah, so I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, now South Los Angeles, and yeah, my experience was a really interesting one, having been awarded a full scholarship. And really, I think my whole experience, I spent learning how to navigate two very, very different worlds, right? Where I was like Celia at Marlborough, and then I was Celia at home, and that actually required a very different, I think, set of skills and understanding, right? That comes with that. And it just became innate. It wasn't like something that is taught to you. You just kind of know what to do. And I always tell folks that because my mom was actually driving me from, where we lived inward, and then we moved a little bit closer, but I spent like, I don't know, maybe an hour to an hour and a half each way driving. I always tell folks that I developed a very healthy anger, right? Because I think, first of all, I was wondering, why do I have to be commuting all the way in and not being able to go to the school that's at home, right? And then at 12 years old, I was like, why are resources and access and opportunity structured in very peculiar ways? And that was really hard, right? Because nobody was teaching me the language, but I just knew inherently that something is wrong, right? Why am I coming in and having access to all of these opportunities all of a sudden when I know that so many family members, so many friends are equally capable, yet they are trapped in school systems that are making choices for them, right? And the opposite was really true for me. And so to me, I actually knew in that car ride that I needed to be doing something about it. And I can't tell you that I knew it was education right away. I thought maybe it was immigration, but I developed this. I think like when the Obamas talk about like how things are and how things should be, I was always thinking about that. And there was this really amazing opportunity that I received, I think in my junior year, where we were able to do internships. And I remember I wanted to do something in immigration because of Prop 187, like that was happening. And I just wanted to be a part of that. And I had an internship with CHIRLA, which is the Coalition of Humane Immigrant Rights. And that just like opened my eyes, right, to all of these injustices and like feeling validated in that way. But my experience was I think a very rude awakening, right? And I think that I really struggled with understanding why I was feeling so many different emotions, ranging from like, I feel so blessed to be here to like, I feel ashamed of who I am, even though nobody's telling me that. But, similar to Nia, it was awkward to me that sometimes I felt more connected to the lovely ladies who were in the cafeteria or our landscapers. And I was like, how can that be, right? So I think all of that, I really am now able to say, like, I have developed a healthy relationship to like feelings that I think have really pushed me to do something about it, right? And so that's the way that I think about my experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Connie, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my experience at Marlborough is very different than I am today. I mean, I grew up in a Christian household, and I think my views, I shared sort of Christian conservative values when I was at Marlborough. So my views around issues like affirmative action, LGBTQ plus rights, reproductive rights were pretty different back then than they are now. But I do think that my identity as an Asian American was something that I started to recognize at Marlborough, because it was actually, I went to a elementary school that was almost all white. There were only 2 Asian students, and Marlborough, our year was a year that expanded more Asian students. It still did not have very Latino or Black students, but I started to see people who looked like me for the first time. And I was the president of the Asian American Association, which was a group my sister had started. And it was sort of the first affinity group. And I remember feeling weird because, I still remember we took AP US history and we took AP Euro history. We never covered the history of any other continent. And so there was this feeling of like, okay, well, I'm Asian, but like, I don't know anything about that part, that's not covered. And so it was this weird feeling, like I kind of felt like my identity wasn't completely recognized when I was at Marlborough. And it took a long time, a very long time before I felt sort of comfortable with who I was. But I do think one thing about Marlborough is it did make me recognize how comfortable I am to see women in leadership positions. All the women were jocks. They were the class president. They were everything, right? And I recognize now that I am much, much more comfortable with women, particularly women of color, as my like sort of social group that I'm comfortable with. And it used to be maybe 10, 15 years ago, I used to think it was a handicap that I wasn't more comfortable around men and I could interact with men as much. And I flipped my thinking more recently that I think it's wonderful that I am really comfortable with other women, particularly women of color, and find that can be a safe space and a place where there's a lot of opportunities to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, as someone who's present at Marlborough now and knowing that there are definitely things that, what does it look like to include students of color or think about maybe some of our marginalized communities, it's definitely, I'm so moved by your stories and how it impacts you today. I think the next question that I have for you is kind of thinking about like, we know that some of the ways Marlborough might have impacted your career journey, but maybe can you talk to us a little bit about what motivates you now? And then like what motivates you to do the work that you're doing right now? And then maybe what are some of the challenges you faced in kind of doing the work that you've chosen to do? Connie, why don't we start back with you?
Sure. So, I mean, I just changed jobs August of last year. And I actually, at my last organization, I loved it. I was there for 11 years. I thought I'd be there for the rest of my life. Two of our classmates, Gina and Julie, were on the board with me. And I was asked to apply for this job and I declined 3 times. And the 4th time, what changed my tune was we hit this pandemic and 2 things happened. First is I saw the Asian community being attacked as we were scapegoated for COVID-19. And then a few months after, it was the murder of George Floyd, and through the Black Lives Matter movement, a public reckoning around systemic racism and anti-Blackness that I'd never seen in my lifetime. Certainly not when I started as a civil rights attorney back in the day. And I said to myself, if my kids are going to be learning and my grandkids are going to be learning about what we're going through right now in their history books. And when they read about it in their history books and they ask me, what was it like to live through this experience? Kind of the way when I would read about like Martin Luther King, I wondered, what was it like to live through that? It was important for me to be able to say that I was doing something as part of the solution. So that was why I made the jump and came to the work that I'm doing now. And so for me, it's very personal that what we're talking about with DEI and racial justice and social justice, it is something that I think all of us in this moment, people are going to reflect back on this moment that we're living in right this second. And if we're not saying that we're embracing it, we will have people asking us about it in the future.
Totally. Kind of where were you? What were you doing? Yeah. Celia, do you want to go ahead and comment as well?
Yeah, I think, this piece around the work being deeply personal really resonates with me as well. I was talking to my daughter about the fact that, there's something about like, that's the way that the saying goes, it's like, okay, doing what you like is freedom, but doing what you love is happiness. And I was like, that's what I feel when I'm able to do the work that I do, right? And it really is a blessing to be able to be excited about the work that you do and get up, out of bed and feel like, yes, like I'm doing what I'm meant to do. And, the fact that I get to work for the Cesar Chavez Foundation, Cesar Chavez, I mean, it's sometimes I have to like pinch myself, right? Because it is such a privilege, right? And I'm interested to really lead the work. I've spent most of my career in urban education, and now I am tasked with thinking about, the opportunities that kids growing up in farm worker communities, migrant students, like what the challenges that they face, right? And I mean, I'm used to some really sobering facts and numbers, but now it's like, oh my gosh, how can things get even tougher, right? Like it's all relative, and I think that in itself, is interesting for me because even though I identify as a Latina woman, right? And we think about intersectionality and all of that stuff, like I sit with a lot of privilege, right? Having attended Marlborough, and then from there, having attended some very elite institutions, and how do I navigate and make sure that I'm aware of all of that, I think that that's actually something that's really, really important to think about. But yeah, I feel blessed, and honestly, I feel like it is a responsibility more than anything, right? Because I think I toggle a lot between like, I feel really blessed, but then I'm like, no, I deserve to be here. I'm smart, right? And I'm capable. And I don't know if y'all like, there's a narrative that I think comes from Marlborough around like confidence, right? And I'm a woman and all of that good stuff. But then at the same time, it's like, it's not okay for me to be just okay, right? I have to think about what does that mean for my community, right? What does that mean for other folks who are also facing, oppression, right? And so that is something that really motivates me.
Thank you. Nia, how will we move to you?
Thanks. I think for me, my greatest motivation right now is access. When I think about my Marlborough experience, similar to something that you said, Celia, just living this duality, right? Being able to know that I was about to go on a trip into the wilderness for 3 days, kayaking or canoeing or whatever, and having these experiences and coming back to my neighborhood with kids who had never left LA, right? And seeing all of the things that all of these new experiences were giving me because of the access that I had was, again, fantastic, beautiful for me, but also like a gut punch thinking about all of my friends who didn't have that and couldn't even fathom becoming a violinist because they may have not even heard a violin before. And so for me, this work, whether it's been in out of school programming and foster care and adoption, it's really been about giving people access to things that they've never been to, seen, heard of, et cetera. And I get to do that every single day in this work. Sometimes that access means teaching adults how to listen to the youth, teaching adults how to let youth lead. That's an access. Sometimes we need to step aside and let the youth really go ahead and take it, and give them the access that we've got, to be able to move the mountains that we've been trying to. So for me, the motivation is access in every avenue, every respect, but making sure that folks have the tools that they need so that when they get on that track or that path, that they've got the things that they need to move forward, but also blazing those trails and creating the opportunities for more Black children to get out into the wilderness, for more folks to see how multidimensional people of color are and not just, the single story that we might only hear on the news or just from the few friends that you might have. So for me, my motivation is access.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I mean, I think you've already kind of started alluding to some of this and some of the values that Marlborough, whether intentional or unintentional, kind of ingrained in you as leaders. But would you be willing to talk about what does your identity, either as a young woman of color at Marlborough or even now as a woman of color, what does it mean to be a leader in promoting social justice and equity? How does that influence how you do your work or what you see in your work? And Celia, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think a lot about intersectionality, right? And I think to me that's really important because I think my biggest fear is like, how am I unintentionally feeding or perpetuating these isms, right, that we know are around us, and sometimes I've benefited from them, right, in very nuanced ways. And so that I think is like an internal dialogue that I think about, right? But I think that there's also like a lot of I don't know, tensions and contradictions, I think in the way that I think show up in this world. And even like if I give an example right here, like at the Cesar Chavez Foundation, right? Actually I'm not the minority. I'm actually part of the majority. And that's like so refreshing, right? Because I am such a firm believer of folks who are the most impacted, right, being at the forefront of like movements. And so that to me is so refreshing to see, and I'm really proud of that. But then at the same time, when I think about senior leadership, I am the one female at that cabinet, right? And actually, what does that mean to sit in that space, and how do you interrogate, right? And how do you actually question and how do you actually push for change? And so that to me is something that I really think about, right? I think about equity, and I think in particular, I'm very, very aware of my gender, right? And actually what does that mean, and how I show up, and how does impact really align to what I really value, like my intentions, right? I think that that's like the ongoing conversation that I have, but it's ingrained in me. It's part of my DNA. It's something that I don't even have to think about. And I'm so grateful for that, right? Because I was able to, I think, develop a very keen understanding, self-awareness around that, and then kind of keep a laser eye on that particular, lens.
Awesome. And I think, thank you for raising the concept of intersectionality, right? Thinking about our experience with gender and race and how those things interact with one another along with our other identities. And Nia, do you want to share kind of your experience as well?
Yeah, I think my identity gives me context, and it's almost like a secret weapon, if you will. My Marlborough experiences lacked a lot of context. I took ancient history with Doc and yet felt no connection to Africa. We're talking about Egypt. How is there no, like, I didn't see me in that class. I was learning about Egypt, but didn't see myself. The classes that I had the opportunity to take, like Black writers, taught by a great teacher, Miss Klein, but again, it was not a person of color. There was no context around what they were talking about, what they were teaching. And I think that for me in this work, I couldn't help and assist and support the students in the way that I do without the context that I have. You know, I'm asking students now to trust me and come out into the wilderness with me for 10 days. But for students of color, when you don't address our history, right, and our historical context around the wilderness and the woods, when you don't address that, it's almost as though it doesn't matter. And it 100% matters. You know, context matters. And I think being at Marlborough without the context, often I got the information. I can absolutely spew at you the Spanish Armada was in 1588. Don't ask me how I still remember that, but some things just stick. But the context was lacking. I did not have Black teachers teaching me about Black history. I didn't have, even in like world history, we had a white woman teaching us about the world. Everything was through a very whitewashed lens, and therefore not the most accurate. It didn't have all of the perspectives that I needed in order to fully move within this woman body that I inhabit. So while I think Marlborough 100% gave me all the confidence and courage I think I needed to step into this world as a woman, not so much as a Black woman. And that piece missing was hurtful, painful. It was an issue, it was a problem, and it didn't allow me the access that I needed to get into some of the spaces that I had. So I think context for me was what was really missing, and something that I consciously have kept in the forefront of my conversation with students, with staff, with all the organizations that I've been involved with, and that if you're not bringing the context, it doesn't matter if you're only bringing the information.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that for us. Yeah, Connie?
Yeah, so as I started this new role, I've been very intentional about really looking at the intersection of race and gender. At my previous organization, because we focused on domestic violence and sexual assault, I was in spaces with a lot of women. But in my current role, even though it's all about racial justice and social justice and solidarity, what I realized was it was still, in certain ways, it felt like a man's world. And so I have been really craving spaces for women leaders to talk about social justice, and not talk about it, but lead social justice and racial justice spaces. So, with all that's happened around the rise in anti-Asian hate, and I speak about it very frequently in the panels and conversations I have, we usually focus around just the hate against Asian Americans. What I'm constantly trying to discuss is the fact that, Stop AAPI's hates data that shows there's been over 9,000 reported hate incidents against Asian Americans, that 3 times women are affected 3 times more than Asian men. Or LA County Human Relations Commission just put out their report on hate crimes, and they said crimes against Asian women increased by 5 times in 2020 compared to 2019. And in speaking to an Asian woman victim who had been targeted and harassed, I asked her, why were you so concerned to speak your story? And she ended up sharing on Instagram and it went viral. And she said, there were two challenges that I faced. One was I was afraid I wouldn't be believed. And two, I was incredibly embarrassed and humiliated by the experience. Now, as somebody who used to work in this field of domestic violence and sexual assault, I can tell you those are the same two concerns that women would tell me in that space too. And what it says is that whether you as an Asian woman are experiencing anti-Asian hate based on your race, or anti-women hate based on your gender because of domestic violence or sexual assault or sexual harassment, those challenges and barriers to speaking up and telling what happened is still there. And I think that's important because what are the strategies to address these challenges and to help people if you don't recognize those kinds of things? And unfortunately, I don't hear enough people talking about it and recognizing it because most of the people that I'm dealing with are male leaders. It's different when you're a woman and you're in social justice and racial justice. And so for me, it really, I think my experience at Marlborough and then working now in in Asian Pacific Islander spaces for so long now, I'm really seeing the importance of bringing those together.
I love that, right? Like you all are definitely like bringing life into Kimberly Kenshaw's concept of intersectionality, right? Like we cannot remove one from another. They're really informing one another and our other identities, of course. I think you talked a little bit about the impact of the pandemic and then months later in terms of George Floyd's murder and maybe some of the intentional work folks were able to kind of sit with maybe during the summer of 2020 in a way that was unprecedented because of the pandemic. I imagine folks who are on this call seeing the description are either, continuing their work around equity and social justice, or maybe beginning for the first time. Would you all be willing to kind of share maybe words of advice for those who are either wanting to go on a pathway formally into this kind of work, or even if they're personally trying to integrate it into their existing work? Like, what would you share with them? Maybe we can start with Connie. Does that work?
Sure. Well, let me start with personally. If you are starting to think about how to talk about DEI or social justice and racial justice, I think it can be very challenging or uncomfortable in the beginning to talk openly and candidly about race. Even for me, after George Floyd, the first colleague of mine who is Black, who I reached out to say, I'm so sorry about what happened. And, I just want you to know I'm here. It took me about 30 minutes to send that simple email because I just didn't know how to word it. And I just felt like, is it inappropriate? I'm not Black, and who am I to be so presumptuous? And what I would say is I hear that all the time. People don't want to be presumptuous. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing and offending. I would say, just do it. I would say 99% of the time, people are going to be very happy. I was flooded with support and words of solidarity when we started to see after Atlanta, after we saw somebody killed in Oakland, and I appreciated that. And I don't want to just hear from Asian people. I want to hear from other people, from other communities telling they share that support. So that's my word for people personally, to just get out of your comfort zone and do that. And I think if you're interested in getting more involved in diversity, equity, inclusion, or in this work, you got to go for it, right? And I think this is kind of a new, really growing space. No one was talking about DEI even like 5 years ago, right? And so you go into it and you just own that space. You own that space because you are a person of color, or you own that space because you're a woman, or because you're, transgender, you're whatever your identity may be. You use your lived experience to say, I have certain understandings, and you'll also have certain privileges. That's okay. You come with both, and you just own that, and you and I'd say just go for it.
Thank you. How about you, Nia?
First, I'd say don't wait. I think people are waiting for a movement, waiting for I gotta wait to get my friends together to do this. No, you actually can start with yourself right now. And really, it's important to start with yourself, right? If you are having a challenging time in starting a conversation with a family member who might have some views that you are not in alignment with, start there before you head out of your house, right? Before you start trying to spread that love or spread your ideas or have those conversations outside of your space, you can certainly start in your own home and starting with yourself. I think that educating yourself, making sure that you know exactly what you're talking about. We use words like DEI and even just racism without necessarily knowing exactly what we're talking about. So I'd say get clear on vocabulary, be clear about what it is that you want to know. And the information that you're trying to get so that you can go out and get it. But to burden others with having to bring you information isn't fair. So I would absolutely say to start with yourself. And then I'd also say believe people. 100% believe people, because the hardest part, I think, for me after George Floyd was the flood of shock from people outside of the POC community. No one in my family was shocked. No one that I spoke to who looks like me was shocked. And if you had believed me when I told you before, and when other folks had been telling you before and saying it to you before, then maybe you wouldn't be so shocked either. So I would say to believe people, don't try to rationalize or figure out or unpack, like just listen and believe people when they tell you about their experiences. And that's a great place to start.
Absolutely right. And like they've been telling you, like, and how do you go back and know that like you've been listening and right? Yeah, thank you. Celia, how about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, well said, Connie and Nia. I totally agree with what they're saying. And, you know, the thing that I would add, I think that there is this piece of understanding your why, right? Like why, like what are your core values and like why now? Like, and how do you want to get involved, right? Because I think that there's different ways, and I think that folks really need to be able to articulate that and really have a very like a lot of clarity as to why, because I firmly believe that, you know, folks who are oppressed need to be at the forefront, right? And we need to know our place, whether we're leading or we're following or we're allies. And I think that I don't know if that's not always clear, right? So you get into problems when you're trying to lead something. I'm like, you really don't have any business being there in the first place, right? And sorry to be so direct about that, but I think that it's something that needs to be said, right? And I also want to say is that we need all people to be involved, right? Actually, I think that is a call for action. That how can you turn your back to when it's like it can't be any more clearer. Nia, I agree. Like we've known this. I've known this all my life, right? So it's like, I'm not surprised. Like, and I think the pandemic in itself, you know, well, it's been horrendous, right? I'm not saying that I'm thankful for it, but it has shown a bright light on inequities that are historical, right? Like this, like things were never, like systems were never working in the first place. They were never intended, right? So when I think about education, I'm like, no, the system is working just fine. It's designed to do what it's supposed to do. And that's to really filter out, right? According to certain lenses. And so I think that that's really important for folks to like really understand their why, have a difficult conversation with yourself and understand who you are in this work. What are your blind spots? We all have blind spots, including myself, right? And try to learn, right? As Nia was saying, like do your research, but also expect to make mistakes, right? And also expect, and like my advice is like when you make a mistake, apologize and try not to repeat it and learn a different way. And the last thing is that I think that people talk a lot about learning, right? But it's like, how do you unlearn actually a lot of things that we have been taught that have been okay? And it's actually, no, it's not okay. And I think that's probably like the most difficult thing to do in this work, unlearn what you thought was okay, because now, right, things are different. And I really don't think that it could be any clearer, to be honest.
Love it, right? You all are dropping gems, and I hope folks were taking notes, because that like you really laid it out for folks in terms of a map. You know, I'm thinking about maybe some of the folks who are on the call who might work with young folks, right? Who are maybe in middle school or, you know, in high school, right? Like thinking back to even your time at Marlborough, maybe that's their own children or folks that they work with. what's something that you would have needed from like adults in order to promote equity and inclusion even at that age? And what would you want folks to know who are working with students or just young folks in their work? What would you want them to know? Yeah, Celia, do you want to start for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to. You know, it feels so weird because part of me feels like, oh my gosh, I'm that 12-year-old little brown girl. Like it kind of just reverts me back to that. But you know, the one thing that I would say is that how do we affirm identity, right? I think that for me, if I had learned to really like love myself at school, and I learned that in other ways, I think that there's so much there, I think, for a young person, right, to really be affirmed. And this goes back to like what Nia was sharing. You can't actually really be doing this work without really knowing who you are and really believing that you are worth it, right? That you are somebody that is worthy, right? When actually maybe the outside is not letting you know that. So to me, that's actually like, it starts with like, how do we promote self-love, right? And then also thinking about how are we affirming identities and understanding where we come from. And maybe it comes from also like, how do you pull out core values, right? And I think that at such an ages, right, we're all forming. And I think that there's actually a lot of overlap in constructing those kind of conversations where you are allowing human beings to be able to have a dialogue around that, right? And I think that no kind of like differences in terms of like race and gender. It's just more about like humanity. And so that would be my, I think like my number one advice there, because I think that in this space, you know, what we're seeing, especially with kids, is that we have systems that are stripping them away, right, from like seeing themselves in the curriculum, feeling seen and feeling heard, right? And we know that children do need windows, and they also need mirrors, right? And they also need to like learn how to use that magnifying glass and be like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So yeah, those are my 2 cents there.
Awesome. And that definitely harkens back to what Nia had said earlier about seeing what perspectives are being taught or seeing folks who look like you.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a little bit more with us?
Yeah. I think I would say this is scary. This work, period. It's scary. You don't get into it to feel better necessarily. I don't necessarily always feel better at the end of the day. And if that's the goal, is to like, I got to do this so I feel good, maybe not necessarily for you, right? Gonna have to have some other target there. But listen to the youth. Listen to them. I think we're given all these tools and all this knowledge and been like, yeah, take the torch. Shh. Filling us with all of this gusto and then telling us to have a seat, right? There's no point in getting people riled up, filling them with all of the motivation and everything that they need to then tell them to sit down or to wait or to have a seat or to, you know, to follow others. So I think like learning how to let young people use that voice. And it's okay to be afraid. Like you honestly don't know what they're going to say all the time. And that's okay. It's really okay. Letting the youth speak for themselves. And I think I wish I had more opportunities to speak for myself and not just be spoken for by people who didn't know me, you know, by people who decided because we were all there that we all then had the same experience. And I think there were so many key opportunities missed when presented with something that was like a blanket for all of us that didn't cover all of us. Mm-hmm. Some of us were still chilly over here. Mm-hmm. So I think making sure that when you're making decisions for people, that their voice is included in it. And if it's not, don't make that decision. And really letting people speak for themselves. If you've given people the tools to speak, let them.
Awesome, right? Really highlighting the importance of voice, whether that's representation at the decision-making table, or as Celia said, kind of leading the movement from that perspective. So thank you. Yeah, Connie, do you want to go ahead and share as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is educating kids on different vantage points of American history. So as soon as the pandemic started and I started hearing about Asian people in this country being attacked, I read with my kids as their goodnight story, a graphic novel by George Takei, who talked about his family's experience being incarcerated during World War II because they were Japanese American. Because I wanted my kids to realize that this is something that unfortunately is part of American history. You know, World War II, Chinese Exclusion Act. It is not new when this country feels threatened by national security or foreign powers or foreign disease, that often Asian Americans are scapegoated because we're seen as foreigners and we're seen as outsiders. And we don't teach history, Latinx history. We don't teach Black history. We don't teach Indigenous history. We don't teach Asian American history or studies in this country well at all. And so and it shouldn't just be the 1 month, like Black History Month, that gets it, which is also the shortest month of the year, that has to be covered, right? We need to teach all of our curriculum in a different way. And I think going back to Celia's point about, kids need mirrors, I think it's really important to create a safe and open environment to say, like, celebrate you being you. Because at Marlborough, we weren't talking about race and identity back then, right? That, when we were in school was when 9/11 happened, right? Not 9/11, I'm sorry. It was when the LA riots happened. We didn't talk about what happened to Rodney King. We weren't talking about preceding that Latasha Harlan's being killed. We weren't talking about what that meant to have, I just learned recently that my uncle who owned a liquor store, had been on the top of his market with a gun to try to protect his business because police wouldn't come into Koreatown because they were busy protecting places like Beverly Hills. But what does this all mean? Right now, where we talk about Black Lives Matter and anti-Asian hate, I feel like in certain ways we've come full circle and like what is happening with racial tension still with the Black and Asian community, and how have we addressed it, and where does it still need to be addressed here in LA especially? And do we have those conversations? Do kids talk about that? Do we have the space? Because we can pretend like, kids don't notice it because it's too deep for them or something like that. But in reality, we do. Like, we reflect upon it, and this impacted us. But I don't think sometimes adults feel that kids can handle these kinds of tough topics and conversations. But we know kids start recognizing racial identity before they're even 5, before they're even in kindergarten. So we should embrace that and start talking about it instead of trying to pretend that it's too deep for kids. They can't understand it, and we can't have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, they're living it. And so how do we give them the tools, the structure to even let them be able to process it and doing that work with them? Yeah, thank you so much. I know we don't have a lot more time left, so I'm going to end on kind of a note about self-care and wondering, as someone who also is engaged in kind of DEI work and some of these, how do you promote social justice and things like that? Audre Lorde talked about self-preservation as a political act of warfare, right? Can you all talk about how you practice self-care or self-preservation as you do the work that you do? And maybe we'll start with you, Nia.
Sure. I'm super privileged to live where I live because my self-care literally is going outside. We're on 640 acres backed up against the Rocky Mountain National Park. So when I'm feeling like I'm at my limit or like the problems of the world are on my shoulders, looking at these Rocky Mountains makes them feel really small. And so for me, it's getting outside, getting back to nature, if you will, really remind me of what's actually in family and friends, and kind of split between like trying to help and do all the things and being centered and getting back to myself. When I get out there or I'm on the river or I'm hiking, which totally does not sound like the life I thought I'd be living right now. But when I'm doing those things, I'm back to me, and I can't do any of this work without me. So getting away from all the other things and getting back to what is helping to drive all those other things I'm trying to do, which is me, is probably my most effective and redundant form of self-care.
Thank you. Celia?
First off, I'm really jealous, Nia. I just have to say it. I'm sitting here like, what? That sounds amazing. But I'm very happy for you. Well, you know, I'm the mom, the proud mom of 3 kids, 12, 10, and 5. And I mean, they are just the joy of my life, right? So for me, I think I've learned very early on to like have my priorities pretty straight, right? And family will always be at the top, like no question about it. And so to me, that's the go-to, right? How do I spend time with my kids? I think apart from that, you know, I've actually started to really push myself and like learning something new, right? To keep my mind active and young. So my go-to is always like cooking. And then I've started to do a little bit of painting. And so I've actually found like that's actually, you know, it's like, I don't think of myself as very creative, but I was like, wow, you know, I've produced some like things where I've like surprised myself. And I think that somehow like some of these emotions are being channeled onto the canvas, which is really fun to see. And then separately from that, honestly, like I'm very good at napping. I know a lot of folks can't nap, but I can do it. And I've been doing it since I was like very young. And so I will squeeze in a nap, you know, whenever I need it. And then I'm able to wake up and be like, all right, I got this, right? And
now I'm jealous, Celia. You got me.
Yeah, but you know what? At the end of the day, I also think, you know what? Every day is a new day. I really do believe that, right? So like, I will have a lot of, you know, quote unquote bad days, but like remembering that there's always a new opportunity, right? Whether it's the next day or the next week, I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And Connie, do you want to share about your practices or the importance of self-preservation for you and your work?
Yeah, like Celia, I also have 3 kids. Mine are 9 on Friday, and then 12 and 16. And I also have a mom who's aging, and you know, my in-laws and all of that. And so for me, it's been really important to set some boundaries. When I started my new job, which my predecessor is a man, I didn't see really strong boundaries between work and home. Yeah. So, you know, people would say, oh, I'm going to go on vacation next week, but don't worry, I'll be available by email or phone if you need anything. And they would tell me on Friday they were going to be gone for a week, and then they would be gone the next week. And they were like, but I told you I'd be available. And I was like, no, that's not how I work. I was like, I'm a planner because I can't afford to do things like that. And when I take time off, like I want to be off. So at the beginning of my job, I would get texts or emails at 8 p.m. saying, could you check this press release? We need to send it tonight or tomorrow morning. So we need to review it tonight. And I wouldn't respond. And people were like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I was having dinner with my family. And until my kids go to bed and you know, I take a shower or something, I don't go back on my emails. And sometimes it does mean I go back at 10 p.m. and I work at night if I have to. But sometimes I say, I'm just going to go to sleep and it's going to wait until tomorrow. And you all have to be okay with that. And you have to plan ahead to give it to me so I can have those boundaries. And that was hard for me to do. I have very, very hardworking immigrant parents with this strong work ethic that was sort of like, oh, it's okay to sleep 4 hours a day to study all the time. And, you know, you should be working 7 days a week, plus find an extra day to squeeze in. And so for me to say, like, I'm not going to do that. And it's not a badge of honor to say you pulled an all-nighter, you know, you should take care of yourself. And so I'm nicer to my children and my husband, and then I'm better functioning at work. And so that's been a big one for me. And then I've had a trainer for 5 years who I sometimes think it's a luxury to be able to pay for someone like that. Mm-hmm. But you know, my husband says I'm not a nice person if I don't work out. So I try to exercise.
Well, I am so grateful for all of you, and especially this conversation. I just want to reflect back for folks who are probably listening. Like we I think sometimes we think about self-care as kind of this like manicures and like spa treatments. And I think you all really highlighted from a range of being in nature to maybe engaging in the arts to thinking about setting boundaries, that self-care can look more than just some of those kind of activities, if you will. Maybe it encompasses that, right? But definitely some of these other things are just as important. And so I know we're at time, I believe. And so I just want to take this moment to say, like, I know that we could have probably covered so much even more, and you all have so much to kind of give our community today, but really want to say thank you for sharing your experiences, sharing your thoughts, leading us down the memory lane in terms of your time at Marlborough, and just say thank you for your time, and close up, I guess, and maybe I'll hand it back to Megan then.
Sorry, searching for the unmute button. I just want to echo Dr. Wells' gratitude. This was, I truly could have listened to this for like the whole rest of the evening. And I'm just so grateful to all four of you for sharing so much of yourselves and your expertise, and just being so genuine and vulnerable with all of us. I really appreciate it, and really feel inspired and very impacted by this conversation. So thank you again. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you. I'm just glad for the excuse to talk to Celia and Nia and see you both.
Yes, yes.
Definitely. It's been too long.
It has.
Absolutely.
All
Bye,
right.
everyone.
Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.